Hi, this is Colin Sandberg from Backbone Performance and the Endurance Collective, and coming at you from Durham, North Carolina, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm going to try to talk about today the issue I've heard coming up a lot lately. Basically, people wondering, should I ride? Specifically, should I ride outside? Should I ride with group? And a lot of people have been weighing in on this. Maybe a lot of you have seen the stuff on USA Cycling, stuff on Cycling News, and the recommendations they have. Uh, so I know a lot of people have very strong opinions about this. I'm going to give you mine, and feel free to disagree with me. Let me know what you're feeling. So I don't have clear-cut answers on a lot of these things, but I'm just going to really try to shed a light on some of the issues that we're talking about here and hopefully simplify this complicated issue a little bit and give you some information. I will note that I'm going to be talking really just about cycling here. So for those of you who are triathletes, runners, swimmers, strength training, I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end, but mostly this is going to be about cycling. So what I've tried to do is create sort of a level system here to talk about the different levels of risk. Level one, going from the safest activity, really indoor riding at home. Not a whole lot of risk here, but a couple things to keep in mind. You want to make sure you don't overdo it. I think that some of you out there have a little bit more time on your hands now that you're working from home, maybe a little bit more flexibility. So you just want to make sure not to overdo it. For the most part, indoors, most people are not going to overdo it on volume. But if you're doing 5 Zwift races a day, you might be overdoing it pretty quickly on intensity, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to put your immune system at risk, and also you don't want to burn yourself out and then not be riding. As I talked about the last couple of these videos that I did, continuing to ride for the stress relief aspect of it, or continuing to exercise, is very, very important here. So you don't want to do anything that's going to put that at risk. There's a lot of really cool stuff on Zwift. I'm not getting paid by Zwift to say this, by the way. There's other VR cycling platforms out there that are great as well, but Zwift is certainly the most popular. And they do have meetups that you can do for group rides that you can either join or create with your friends or local cycling organization or your team or whatever. So check that out. Also, yeah, in some places, riding indoors is going to be and in some situations, riding indoors is the only option, or maybe the only safe option. Talk about that later. So level 2 is going to be outdoor solo rides. If you are riding outside, certainly bring everything you need with you so you don't have to stop, and try to keep 6 feet away from other people. Depending on where you live, there may be different degrees of difficulty in doing that. So, if you're in a really rural area riding down a street, no cars and no other traffic, it's one thing. Riding through the middle of the desert or the forest, versus if you're in Central Park, New York, trying to stay 6 feet away from people is going to be another matter. You get the idea. If you are riding on trails, like mountain biking specifically, keep in mind there's going to be other trail users there, so there's going to be other pedestrians. And in a lot of areas, what we've seen with this is that people are trying to get outside, so it might even be increased usage from what you would normally expect, certainly during like a weekday in the middle of the day. Do your best to try to pass people with a 6-foot berth. Be aware of what's going on locally in your area. Some places have closed down some of these parks, closed down some of these trails. So sort of stay in touch with what's going on there and follow the law follow those local recommendations, even if you don't agree with them. Um, Finally, the one other thing to consider here, and this is the reason, some people have said, don't even ride by yourself outside. Just just ride, keep it indoors right now, is, what if you get in an accident? What if you get hit by a car? What if you take a spill? Are you going to be comfortable going to the hospital right now? Some places, the hospitals are already overwhelmed. You don't want to overwhelm them more with your broken collarbone in the middle of a pandemic. And also, there's more chance that you're going to pick this up at a hospital. So that's something you need to consider, the state of your local area. And I would recommend, if you're riding outside now, bring your ID, because there may be checkpoints in certain areas where there are shelter-in-place mandates. You may have to show ID. If you don't, that may be coming shortly. So level 3 is riding outside with one other person. And this is definitely a bit of a gray area here. And I know people have different opinions on it. But certainly if you're riding with just one other person as opposed to a larger group, it's going to be easier to maintain a little bit of a gap. If you're riding off-road, that may be preferable. If you're riding on the road, I'd recommend riding side by side. And like I said before, if you're doing this, make sure you're being aware and respectful of other trail users. Level 4 here, smaller, and I'm talking, just to quantify it, 3 to 9 rider group rides. This gets a bit tough here because it's going to be pretty difficult at this point to maintain a 6-foot gap, especially as the temperatures start to heat up. Staying out of that spray zone of somebody's sweat. Some people are heavy sweaters, and I know you might be getting hit with that sweat from 20 feet back. Keep in mind, a lot of these COVID-19 cases, people are asymptomatic, at least at first, and sometimes through the duration of their infection. And you might think, okay, everyone I'm riding with is relatively young, relatively healthy, but you got to consider everybody that you might interact with at home or at work. If somebody is in the healthcare field, who they're working with, if somebody's taking care of an elderly parent at home, and you might think, oh, there's no cases in my area. But at this point, I think we don't know yet, because we're not all getting tested. And if we were in a situation where every single person is getting tested, at least on a weekly basis, maybe you could make a little bit safer of a judgment call here. But we just don't know at this point, because there's still a shortage of tests. So again, it gets complicated. And I don't want to overcomplicate it, and I think that's why some people have said, just keep it simple, just ride indoors, or only ride by yourself. And I get that. I get the point of making a simple, straightforward recommendation, because whenever there's a gray area, people are going to have different interpretations of that. So I'll get to my own individual risk assessment a little bit later. Finally, level 5 large group rides. I think, at this time, as of March 24th, 2020, this is pretty clearly not a good idea. But that doesn't mean it's illegal. Probably in most areas of the country right now, it's still legal, but not a good idea. It's going to be impossible to stay out of that spray zone. And, I guess I would just say, things might change, maybe for the better, especially in certain areas. Once we do have widespread testing, might be okay to do this. We might get to a point where, medium-sized group rides, let's say 10 to 20 riders, in certain areas, in certain situations are okay. We'll see. Okay, so finally, here's a chart that I made up of these different levels. And what you'll see in this first column is basically like, okay, if I'm healthy, you're not in a high risk group, I'm not living in a hotspot, I haven't traveled anywhere, and no one in, yeah, um, I haven't interacted with any infected people or anybody in vulnerable populations in my household or that I work with, and I'm not in a shelter-in-place area. Uh, Obviously, yeah, riding indoor solo, okay. Outdoor solo, outdoor with one other person. In my opinion, I think I'm still comfortable doing that. I'm still comfortable riding outside. I live in Durham, North Carolina. There's no shelter-in-place mandate as of today. Um, so I'm really only interacting with people in my home. For me, personally, I'm still comfortable going on a ride with one other person that I can ride side by side with or 6 feet apart with on the trails, who's in basically the same situation I am. But that might change, and again, I know that that's sort of the gray area where people have different opinions about it. So you might you might feel differently. As far as small group rides, I think. Personally, that's something I'm not comfortable with at this point. And we're talking about those 3 to 9 rider group rides. At this point, it's just the risk versus reward isn't worth it. But we'll see the different areas, and yeah, large groups, I would say no. Now, if you are in an area with a shelter-in-place mandate or stay-at-home mandate, I would say really indoor by yourself, obviously still okay. Outdoor solo is a maybe, and I'll talk about that more, but anything more than that, I would say no, in my opinion. And if you have symptoms, or if you have had interactions with anybody who's tested positive or has symptoms, certainly just ride inside, and even there you want to use a little bit more caution, because you don't want to do anything that would run down your immune system. So I'm just going to make a couple notes, because the whole shelter-in-place, stay-at-home thing is not as straightforward as you might think. This is a map which is from the New York Times that I saw today. Really good, up-to-date resource you can look at on the areas that have imposed. Sometimes it's been statewide, which are the solid color states here. Sometimes it's been just certain counties that have these shelter-in-place or stay-at-home mandates. Most of these allow exceptions for outside exercise, but not all of them. So that's where you want to know specifically what's going on in your area. Again, if you are going outside, I would bring an ID. I would make sure that you're being very careful, that you're not going far from home, and you may not want to do it at all. Again, if you're not comfortable going to the hospital, if you had a crash or an altercation with a vehicle or something, you may just want to play it safe and stay inside at this point. Other thing to keep in mind is things can change quickly. Spain, France, other countries have already explicitly said no outdoor cycling at this point. So be prepared to ride exclusively indoors, really no matter where you are. Maybe it won't ever get to that point. Maybe that could happen tomorrow for all of us. That's what we're looking at. So have that indoor setup ready to go. Okay, so a couple notes about running, swimming, and strength training. Running, it's going to be a little bit easier to stay close to home because you're not going as fast. It also might be a little bit easier if you're running with a training partner to sort of maintain that 6-foot gap and still have a little bit of a conversation. And there's probably a little less risk of some sort of accident. I guess you could still sprain your ankle or something, but you're not going to crash running, hopefully. Swimming, I think most public pools are closed at this point, but maybe there's some areas where you live in a community with like a small fitness center or something that's still open. Um, it should be noted that chlorine does most likely kill this virus, but it's not just being in the pool. You know, if we were just talking about swimming, then um, then it's one thing. You know, you're in one lane, I'm in another separate lane, and the chlorine kills this virus. But I need to get into that. If it's an indoor pool, you know, how do I get there? What doors do I go through? What public spaces do I go through? Do I have to use a locker room and all those things? So, um, personally, I'd say I wouldn't do it right now. Don't think it's worth the risk. But don't want to forget about open water swims. You know, maybe you have access to the ocean or to rivers or a lake, and there's a lot of triathletes out there that need some work with their open water swimming anyway. So this would be a great idea. Just, you know, you want to be pretty confident in your swimming ability at this point, safety reasons, and again, you don't want to end up in a hospital right now, probably. So there's current when you swim in the ocean or a river. There could be other things like rocks, other dangers. So if you're comfortable, if you're a competent swimmer, you're comfortable doing it, um, it's something to consider. Strength training, I think most gyms are closed right now. If they're not, I'd stay away. But there's quite a bit you can do at home with minimal equipment, and I'm talking a mat, some stretch bands, stability ball, medicine ball, dumbbells, or kettlebells. There's quite a bit you can do. Just give you a couple good resources here. One is my friend, Coach Menachem Brody, who many of you may have heard of. He's had a few appearances on the Fast Talk podcast now. He's also got a new book out called The Vortex Method, really good. And he is doing a video blog series with some recommendations about strength training that you can do at home that I would check out. Another one is a book that's been out for a few years now. It's Tom Danielson's Core Advantage book. It's got a lot of good stuff in it, and it's geared towards cyclists. Most of it's just stuff you can do at home on the mat. So some things to check out there. This actually may be a great opportunity for some of you to do some strength training that maybe you didn't do such a great job of during the winter time, or you could use a little bit more help. We don't have races going on, so if your legs are a little dead or your core is a little dead from doing that strength training stuff, so what? Okay, just a few final notes here. Like I said at the beginning, I know people have some very strong opinions about this, and that's understandable. I know that there's a lot of people saying really like we should just be telling people just ride indoors right now, or maybe people that say just ride by yourself, and even there, you know, be very, very careful. And I get that. I respect those opinions. I'm happy to hear from everybody. If you disagree with me, let me know. Just, you know, don't be a dick. We're all trying to do the best thing for everybody. We're all trying to flatten the curve here. So let's try not to be too judgmental and talk about what our recommendations are here. But things are changing quickly, so pay attention to what's going on in your local area. And just remember, we're all in this together. It's and it's not just about you and what you feel your personal risk level is. You know, if I'm going to go down a really gnarly trail on my mountain bike, that's sort of a personal risk. I can say, well, maybe I'm willing to take that risk, maybe I'm not. You know, what's the personal risk of entering a Cat 5 criterium or something? That's a personal decision you can make. Here, we're talking about we're talking about society. We're talking about our loved ones. We're talking about, you know, a worldwide pandemic, and it's not just about your personal comfort level with the risk. So we're all in this together. Hang in there, and leave your questions or comments in the comments section. Subscribe on YouTube. Until next time.